Good evening, friends. Pastor Justin here, trying to maintain social distance with our good friends, Amy and Danny Dwight. And they have come in today to share their story of redemption and hope. Danny, Amy, we love you. We're so grateful that you are part of our family here. And thank you for coming in today to share your story.
Okay. Redemption and hope. We've watched the stories that Carol and Janie and Brenda and others have recorded and shared with us. One of the things that Carol mentioned in her, she was looking up the word redemption, and she said when she came to the idea of rescue as a definition of redemption, that resonated for her. And that resonates for me too. And it also makes me think of that verse in Matthew 11, "Come to me, all ye who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." For me, I think that's what redemption feels like, that take my yoke upon you, knowing that redemption is, for me anyway, it probably involves letting go of the need for control and leaning into my faith and into all that comes with a relationship with God and what that means. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background. Right now, what we're all going through with sheltering in place and a lot of uncertainty in our lives makes me remember a time many, many years ago when I was 10 years old. My dad was a career Foreign Service officer, and we lived in Libya when Gaddafi overthrew the government. And it happened on the first day of school. And the embassy carryall had just taken us all to school. And within an hour, the embassy carryall came back and picked us all up from school. And we got to stay home 24 hours a day, 24-hour curfew for 2 weeks. With my dad going to the embassy every single day through military checkpoints in a very unstable world at that time. And my mother every day hoping he would make it home. And he did. And I guess maybe our redemption from that came with the next assignment when we left Libya, which didn't come for another year. Go forward a few more years, and a very good friend of mine, her dad and my dad had gone into the Foreign Service together. We literally have known each other our entire lives. Her dad became very suddenly ill and was in ICU for 3 months, and then he died when we were 14. That was very, very real, going through that time with that family, who are still really good friends. There was a lot of hope there that didn't feel like it went anywhere good. But I can tell you that family has continued to hope. My friend Allison became ordained in the Episcopal Church many years later, has had and continues to have an amazing life. Along the way in there, I got married. I married a man named Bob, who, as it turned out, was an alcoholic. I didn't know what that looked like. Nobody in my family was an alcoholic. Although we bounced around a lot when I was growing up, there were pretty normal relationships. My parents had a very functioning marriage, and a good marriage, and I had good relationships with my siblings. I didn't really understand the dysfunction that comes with alcoholism and all forms of addiction. It took me a long time to realize that this was not my battle to fight, certainly not my battle to win. And my hope as that marriage ended was that maybe I could find life that did not involve walking on eggshells every day. And lo and behold, along it came. It had to have been the hand of God. I don't know how Peter and I would have ever met if there wasn't some divine intervention in there. But I got to have a marriage with somebody who actually understood what giving and receiving love was about. We got to have, we were married for 10 years, but the last 2 or 3 were on the rough side. He got sick. Took us almost a year and a half of doctor's visits, in just interminable diagnostic testing, and on his part, constant, chronic, escalating pain. And then we finally got the news that we'd sort of suspected all along, which was he had cancer. And 6 months later, he died. That was March of 2012. One of the things that his death did changed in my life was, and I'm giving you the quick version just because we don't want to be here all night. But while God had been in my life and I'd been in and out of church and fellowship groups at various times, we weren't regular churchgoers, and certainly with Bob in my first marriage, we definitely weren't. Peter had a very, very strong faith. Prayer was part of our life, not on a daily basis, but it was there, and an awareness of the presence of God was certainly part of our life. But after he died, I started showing up at church. In large part, at least in the beginning, because Sunday morning was the hardest time in the world for me to be home alone. Peter and I ran a business together. Monday through Saturday, we're usually pretty darn busy, but the one day of the week when we used to just allow ourselves downtime was Sunday. So being home alone on Sundays was not something I really wanted to be, so I thought church would be a good place to go. That step really helped me to begin to move forward more solidly. Although in other parts of my life, things were still kind of falling apart. The business that Peter and I ran together had suffered during his illness. And we all thought we could figure out how to do it without him. And it took almost 2 years for us to realize that just wasn't working. So in February of 2014, the business finally officially closed, took with it not all, but a good chunk of my financial security. And so I was at that point, fortunately, pretty well ensconced with a good church family and some support there. I had been attending a grief group. I was actually right at that point starting training to be a Stephen minister, which, if any of you are familiar with Stephen ministry, it's a wonderful program. And the training for me wound up being about the best course of Christian group counseling I could have ever had. And that could not have happened for me at a better time in my life. Really allowed me to do some deep work on myself and to move forward kind of one day at a time. With things were really kind of dicey for a while, not in terms of personal safety, but in terms of where my life was going to be, what it was going to look like, how I was going to make it all work. And I really had to just, I started each day just saying, okay, Lord, I think these are the things I got to take care of today. And I'm here, and help me, and we'll knuckle down and do it. And every day I would just go through that every single day, and lo and behold, picked up my head about 6-8 months later and looked behind me, and wow, things were starting to feel a little more solid. And then along came Danny.
You done?
I'm done.
Okay. Well, today is April 1st, April Fool's Day, and 69 years ago today, my first wife was born. Catherine Charity Kaysen, born up in Fort Worth, April Fool's, 1951. Her mom and daddy were members up at the South Fort Worth Baptist Church, and that's where my mama took me. And Kathy and I knew each other from church. And eventually, she caught my attention enough to where I asked her out, and we started going together. And in April of 1969, she turned 18. May the 17th of 1969, we got married, and June the 1st of 1969, she graduated from high school. And 4 years later, we had our first child. So get those thoughts out of your head. Uh, we met at the Baptist church. My cousin was a Baptist preacher. He married us there. We stayed in the Baptist church. If it hadn't been for the Baptist church, we wouldn't have been together. And we continued going to church after we got married. And then I changed jobs and moved over to Dallas, and we continued going to church for a while over there. It never was a matter of just making a conscious attempt to quit going to church, but we just kind of drifted away. My job called for me to work a lot of weekends. Our two boys played baseball, football, soccer weekends. They played on teams that traveled, and we spent a lot of time on the weekends. And that helped a little bit to not go to church. And the times that we were free, we just decided not to go to church. We stayed at home. In 2001, I transferred up to Washington, D.C., and Kathy went up there with me. And our two boys had moved out by that time. They were on their own. And we stayed up there for 3.5 years and moved back to Granbury in 2005. In fact, Amy and I both moved to Granbury the same month of the same year, but we didn't meet each other for a long time after that. We didn't go to church down here either. And by 2013, I probably hadn't set foot in a church more than once or twice over the last 25 years. It wasn't a matter of lack of belief. I mean, I was raised in the Baptist church, baptized when I was 13, and it was just a drift. It was not a conscious thing, just a drift. And suddenly not going to church became the norm. May the 15th of 2013, a tornado hit my house where I was living over in Pecan Plantation, and we had to move out of the house for 7 months while they did the repairs to it. On December the 10th of 2013, we moved back into the house, and the furniture movers had put a bunch of cardboard down the floor to keep from messing the floors up when they brought the furniture in. And Kathy stepped on one of those pieces of cardboard, and it slipped, and she came up and fell down on her hip. And she said she was okay, and so we continued doing things. December the 12th of 2013, a friend of hers and she decided to go look at the homes that were decorated for Christmas in Pecan Plantation. And she came over to the house to get Kathy, and I went out there and said, I love you, babe. I gave her a kiss and said, y'all have fun. And then I went back to moving boxes while she went to look at the houses. And we had no cell phone service at that point because of where we lived. And I was between houses, moving things from the rent house back into our permanent house. And I happened to see a message on our house phone to call the emergency medical services for Lake Granbury Hospital. And I finally got a hold of them, and they said, you need to come to the hospital. There's been an incident. And I said, what was it? And they said, just please come to the hospital. There's been an incident. When I got to the hospital, they took me back to the ER where she was in one of the examining rooms. And there was an EMS guy up on the gurney giving her CPR, or at least trying to. Come to find out later, she had died twice on the way to the hospital. What had happened was when she fell on December the 10th, she bruised her hip, and on December the 12th, some blood clots broke loose from that, went to her heart and lungs, and she collapsed up at Pecan Plantation Country Club as they were fixing to go look at houses. They got an ambulance, and they revived her twice on the way to the hospital, and the third time she died, they couldn't bring her back. And that's when I walked in the door. Something to keep in mind through all this is at that time I was retired. I retired in 2004, but I've been a cop for 33 years of one kind or another. And I've seen every kind of pain and suffering and agony that there is to see. But seeing my wife laying there, 44 and a half years I've been with this woman, to see her laying on the gurney dying and then dead, cut me down like nothing else ever has. And I sat on the floor of the ER and I cried. And I cry now thinking of it. And I'm glad I do, because that's, to me, that's an indicator of how much I loved her. We buried her a few days after that. And then I had to get on with the work of moving into the house, and I had 250 boxes to empty. And I had a stack of condolence cards from all the guys I played golf with and friends, and one thing and another. And one guy I'd played golf with had sent me a card and said his wife had died, and he went to a grief group called Starting a New Life, and they had helped him a lot. He said if I wanted to go, call him. So I called him, and don't know why. Like I said, I've been in law enforcement for a third of a century, and I'm not big on foo-foo and touchy-feely stuff at all. And I knew that's what this was, but for some reason I went. And he took me down there. They meet over at we still meet, in fact, over at the Catholic Church. And he took me in there, and there's a big room with probably 40 people standing around talking. And Amy was in the middle of the room talking to somebody else. And my friend took me up to her and he said, Amy, this is Danny. His wife just died. Take care of him. And then he left. And Amy kind of took me under her wing, and I was in her small group up there. And then she called me. And for the first 6 months, I didn't know who she was, didn't remember her name or anything. I would just, everything was a blur. Justin's been giving this preaching series on abiding in the darkness. And that's what I did. I lived. That's all I did. Unpacked boxes, slept, ate, went to bed. And that was it. That's all I did. Somewhere in there, though, I knew that I had to do something. The first thing I tried to do was to blame the doctors, blame the ambulance drivers, blame the people at Pecan, whoever. This was somebody's fault. There's something wrong was done here, and I need to find out who it was. But there wasn't. Couldn't blame anybody. I mean, she slipped on a piece of cardboard. That's not a chargeable offense probably, but I had to blame somebody. So I ended up blaming God after a while. And I bargained with him and just did all those things you do when you're going through grief. You got to blame somebody, and you want yourself to go and bring that person back. And that's just not the way it works. So somewhere in there, I finally got the feeling that I needed to be back. I needed to go to church to get something that was missing from my life. And I went down to Acton Methodist, and I talked to the preacher. Chris Mesa was the preacher then. And I had a couple of conversations with him. And I told him what I was going through. And I told him I was pretty hacked off at the way God had treated me. And he said, look, I'd love for you to join here. But if you don't, it's okay. But wherever you go, you need to end up in a place that will let you ask questions, let you doubt things about your faith and about God. Join a group of people that will allow you to have a lack of confidence, a lack of surety about what's happening. And I ended up joining there because the people I met there were the people that did the things he said that I needed to be around, and I agreed with him. And I gradually came to sense that this was what was missing. It wasn't God's fault that Kathy died. Just things happen in this world sometimes. And second time I came out of the meeting with him, stepped out in the hallway, and Amy was standing in this hallway talking to somebody else. And I said, hey, I didn't know are you working or what? And she said, no, yeah, I'm working, but I'm also a member here, and which I didn't know at the time. And you can believe this or not, but it had nothing to do with my decision. But I later joined that church, either because of or in spite of the fact that Amy was there. But about a year after Kathy died, I came to the realization that I needed to have a life. I needed to move forward, whatever was next for me, which I didn't have a clue what it was. And then at about the same time, I realized that I wanted to be doing something socially with some people besides playing golf 5 or 6 times a week. And Amy, by that time, had become my best friend, literally my best friend. And if we'd have never got married, she'd still be my best friend. But we started going out and things got out of hand and we ended up having to get married. So here we are. It's probably one of the best things that ever happened to me. We got married in April of 2016, and that's kind of the start of the next chapter of our lives. And I'll let her talk about it, but I just, I can't express to you how lost I was when my wife died. She was the center of my life. I'd been with her for almost a half a century, including the time we dated before we got married. And to lose that was like no experience I've ever had. And it was the worst tragedy I think I could ever be experienced in having. But out of that tragedy, a blessing came. And I've always looked for that big epiphany of experience with God, and I didn't get that. I got a bunch of little small steps along the way where He kept nudging me to do this and do that and responding in ways that were totally out of character. And that's what got me back into church. And I've come back into church as a brand new Christian because I'm not sure that I was fully a Christian before. And I'm learning, and it's hard to be in church and go and talk to people who've been Christians their whole lives. It's intimidating to me to be around those people, but I so much want to be a part of a community that loves God and serves Him. And try to keep things simple. I love God and love other people and serve everybody. And that's what we're called to do.
That's very true. And I think I was just remembering when Jordan and Austin did their story, she said something that to me kind of hits the nail on the head when talking about their journey. She said, I wouldn't wish this on anyone, but I wouldn't want it taken away from me either. And I think that's very much how we feel. We wouldn't wish what we went through, particularly with the death of Peter and of Kathy. And I don't believe that they had to die so that we could magically come together. I don't think there's causal relationships. I think we're human beings and our lives are messed up sometimes and awful things happen. You know, the rain falls on everybody, right? The sun shines on everybody. It's suffering is part of life. If we can hold on through the suffering, if we abide in the darkness, light does come, and it's light that you have no idea the quality of the light. When before you even enter the darkness, you don't know what's on the other side of it. So holding on through darkness and accompanying each other, that's a big part of what we do in our lives now. We're still involved in the grief group. Aside from feeding people, which is always a big thing, we like to do food ministries. But walking alongside people who are abiding their darkness, to me, that's holy ground. That's my version of holy ground. I think that's where the veil is so thin. You can just feel it. So whatever darkness anybody's having, I would just say, hold on. And open the door to people to walk with you, walk alongside you, keep you company. We all have to do our own journeys. Nobody can do it for us. We got to do it ourselves. But when we hang in there and abide through that darkness, it's amazing. The redemption, the hope, the light, it comes. It comes.
And if we'd have met when we both moved here in 2005, or if we'd have met in 2010 or 11 or 12, we would have just been known each other, and that'd been about the extent of it probably. who we are now and who we are when we met was formed by my 45 years with Kathy and by Amy with Peter and Bob and her family life that she lived through. We are what we are now because of all this stuff that transpired in the past. And that prepared us for the moment when we came together. And our coming together, they're not to say we get along all the time. We don't. We disagree heatedly sometimes. But we have the same goals in mind. We want to be a Christian family. We got wedding rings that are 3 bands of gold, 2 white bands for Amy and I, and wrapped around a gold band, which is God. That's our family. And we have a singular goal, no matter what we're doing, is to serve God. And our whole marriage, our whole philosophies of life are built around that. And again, we would not be able to do that if we had not gone through all the pain and suffering and agony of all those years before that brought us to the point that we came together. We have a singular marriage, we're more than one in the flesh. We are one, period, for everything we do. And that's my hope for the future, is looking at us and carrying this feeling, this hope for what we can do, what we want to do, how we can help others. And yes, we hope for a wonderful afterlife, but even more than that, we hope we can bring some of heaven into the world now and make things better for the people that we serve in this community.
Amen. We probably better stop. We're going to go
Yeah, I
on
think
all
we've
night.
run over our time. So that's all, folks.
Thanks, guys. Okay, it's not ending. You try it.
Well, you may be stuck with us, people. We can't get the button to work.
That's not a tablet. You gotta. Sorry.
Oh, it's not
we
a
thought it
touch
was
screen.
a touch screen. How come you, Justin? You didn't tell us that.